The success of Marvel movies compared to other action film franchises comes down to one key factor: its focus on character. Most of my favorite moments in the Marvel Cinematic Universe are intimate character moments that demonstrate raw human emotion amidst the frenzy of the superhero world. Marvel filmmakers know that the bread and butter of their universe starts and ends with each character's personal flaws, motivations, pitfalls, and redemption. There's a common theme throughout all of my favorite character moments, which is breaking characters by building up their hero facade just to have it abruptly crash down so they realize that their growth needs to start with the human underneath the facade. In this video, I'll be breaking down one of my favorite scenes that accomplishes this, while going over why the use of facade is such a powerful storytelling technique in the superhero genre. So let's take a look at my one marvelous scene from Captain America Civil War, Tony Stark's Grant Foundation presentation.
Reframe the future!
Before we dive into the scene beat by beat, there are a few things worth pointing out as to why this scene in particular is so significant. First of all, this scene is the first time that the Marvel powerhouse creative team of screenwriters Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely and directors Joe and Anthony Russo get to play with Tony Stark. The way that the Russo brothers approach character is greatly influential in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They like to strip the mightiest of heroes from their comfort zone to explore the merits of that character from the roots of who they are as a person. The Russos accomplish this mostly with one powerful technique. They try to break their characters by making them believe in a facade of heroism and mythos, just to make them realize the faults of their facade so they become a hero based on who they actually are as people. Facade is an important aspect of all character arcs. In his book called Story, Robert McKee had this to say about facade: "The revelation of true character in contrast or contradiction to characterization is fundamental to all fine storytelling." Life teaches this grand principle: what seems is not what is. People are not what they appear to be. A hidden nature waits concealed behind a facade of traits. No matter what they say, no matter how they comport themselves, the only way we ever come to know characters in depth is through their choices under pressure. Facade plays a more overt role in superhero stories over any other genre because it fuels the mythos that identifies superheroes. Superheroes can be identified by their power, or the costume they wear, or the world-saving mission they are on. All of these factors appeal to the idea of what a superhero can be, but they all act as facade that shields the audience from the true character underneath the cape and tights. Superhero films that flop often focus on the cool factor of superheroes, like their powers or costume, and shy away from telling a rich character story. The Russo brothers love to make their characters make a choice under pressure that conflicts with their facade. In Captain America: The Winter Soldier, they bring Cap's world down by revealing that S.H.I.E.L.D. is actually Hydra. They force Cap to choose between his facade of the soldier who is always following orders, or his true character of doing the right thing based on his own personal morals. Here's what Anthony Russo had to say about Cap's arc in The Winter Soldier.
When we were approaching that movie, it's like, how do you challenge a character like Captain America? He's so strong, he's so resolute, he's so single-minded in his purpose. And we thought it was very important to find a way to undermine that, to strip away everything that he was relying on. So this moment of revelation happens in about in the middle of the movie in an elevator when he's in the Triskelion. He's just finished talking to Robert Redford. He's just lied to a superior, presumably for the first time in his life. That's not something Captain America would normally do. Then he gets in an elevator after that meeting, and he realizes in that elevator that he's surrounded not by allies that he believed, as he previously believed, but by enemies. And it's a huge turning point in Captain America's arc.
The Russos do something similar with Thor in Avengers: Infinity War. After taking the baton from Taika Waititi, the Russos go the extra mile and continue to take away everything from Thor that consists of his heroic facade. This becomes evident in the scene with Rocket, where he reveals that behind his facade of being the vengeful king, he's really alone and scared and trying his best to be the hero that everyone sees him as.
Thanos is just the latest in a long line of bastards, and he'll be the latest to feel my vengeance. Fate wills it so.
Mm-hmm. And what if you're wrong?
Well, if I'm wrong, then what more could I lose?
In the end of Infinity War, Thor's facade wins. His facade won't let him give in to making the difficult choice. Thor chooses the moment of redemption over getting the job done, and it's not until Avengers Endgame that he realizes he has been focused on the facade that has been placed upon him and not the person he really is. It takes a lot of skill to break down the superhero's facade without completely changing or ruining the character. In my opinion, the reason why Russo brother Marvel films are the best Marvel films is because of their ability to masterfully break through a character's facade in a way that exposes the real reasons why we connect with these characters. In this one scene in Civil War, the Russos efficiently accomplish a few things. They present Tony's facade, they make the facade come crashing down in front of him, they present how Tony handles himself when reality begins to overcome his facade, and they establish Tony's motivation for the entire movie. All in one scene. This scene is about setting the stage for Tony's guilt, trauma, and how he builds a facade to process his grief. Tony's history of anxiety leads him to feeling solely responsible for the many casualties caused by an Avengers-level battle. We have seen him try to process this grief in many different ways, from drinking to non-stop suit building to the creation of Ultron. Now, in the wake of Age of Ultron, Tony is trying to use his resources to process his guilt. He creates a facade of being a donor that uses his money and influence to give back to communities. But it's just that, it's a facade. It doesn't help him come to terms with the hazards of being a hero, and it doesn't help him process his grief in a healthy way that will enable true growth. So with all that set up, let's get into this marvelous scene. To analyze this scene in more detail, we're going to add 2 meters. The first one will be a meter for Tony's belief, where we can see him go back and forth between believing in his facade or believing in his reality. The second meter is the fight or flight meter, where we'll see how Tony instinctually reacts to facing both his facade and his reality. Okay, let's get started.
Try to remember the kind of September when grass was green.
The message of the song that Tony's mom is singing is pretty clear. Remember the good moments in your life, even if they happen through bad times. This is how Tony remembers his parents, or at least how he chooses to remember his parents through the traumatic experience of their death.
You know what's about to happen. Say something. If you don't, you'll regret it.
I love you, Dan. And I know you did the best you could. An extremely costly method of hijacking the hippocampus to clear traumatic memories. It doesn't change the fact that they never made it to the airport or all the things I did to avoid processing my grief.
The technology that Tony is demonstrating is to clear traumatic memories or edit them so they become less traumatic. Tony would rather erase or change trauma instead of facing his issues head on. This is important because the facade that he builds for himself is a defense mechanism against coming to terms with his trauma. He would rather create this false identity to try to change the way he views himself.
Help me out, what's the MIT mission statement? To generate, disseminate, and preserve knowledge. And work with others to bring it to bear on the world's great challenges.
The work with others line is a clear foreshadow to the rift that is about to come between him and Cap.
As of this moment, every student has been made an equal recipient of the inaugural September Foundation grant. As in, all of your projects have just been approved and funded. No streets, no taxes, just reframe the future.
What I find interesting here is that Tony says reframe the future. Let's think about this wording. Reframe the future, not improve the future or revolutionize the future. He uses the word reframe, as in make it different. At this point, Tony is already trying to reframe his past traumatic memories, and he's also trying to reframe his own identity. But reframing isn't the same as changing or growing or improving. It's just a quick fix to perception. Remember Robert McKee's words, "What seems is not what is," and the only way we ever come to know characters in depth is through their choices under pressure. The way Tony is reframing his character does not require making any choice under pressure. He's just constructing his facade.
Starting now, Go break some eggs.
At the exact moment when Tony reaches the peak of his facade by funding every student project, Tony is immediately brought back to reality. Pepper is gone. In a way, Tony helping the students is an attempt to bring Pepper back. Pepper's absence is a big influence to Tony's decision-making throughout the film. He thinks that these little acts of generosity will be enough for Pepper, but the real problem is that Tony has not found a healthy way to cope with his trauma and guilt, and has become too much of a problem for Pepper to handle. In a moment that is supposed to feed Tony's facade and give him a sense of selflessness and euphoria, it ends up being heartbreaking for him because he is immediately faced with the reality of his true problem, and he's still not willing to accept it. His facade is being compromised, and his reaction is to run away from his problem. Okay, so this next walk and talk really showcases the tremendous acting of Robert Downey Jr.
That took my breath away. Tony, so generous. So much money. Wow. Out of curiosity, will any portion of that grant be made available to faculty? I know, ooh, gross, but hear me out. I have got this killer idea for a self-cooking hot dog, basically chemical detonator.
Restrooms this way, yeah?
Yeah, embedded in the meat shaft.
Stark, I am so sorry about the teleprompter.
In the past, Tony would love the adoration from the dean. In fact, the dean drooling over Stark in this scene represents Tony's facade, as he's telling Tony everything he would normally want to hear. Tony's lack of attention to anything he's saying tells us his facade is no longer in control of the situation, and the only thing he can think about is his guilt or his reality. Tony doesn't seem present at all until the very moment the stagehand brings up the teleprompter. The stagehand represents Tony's reality, and he finally pays attention to it, but it's still too much to handle. Look at the way Tony reacts when she brings up Pepper.
I didn't know Miss Potts had canceled. They didn't have time to fix it. I didn't know Miss Potts had canceled.
He looks down as soon as she mentions Pepper's name. Again, Tony's reality is getting too real, and he chooses to deflect.
Didn't have time to fix it.
Fine. I'll be right back.
We'll catch up later.
Tony asking for the bathroom is his instinct saying flight. He is confronted with his guilt of Pepper not being there, and he wants to escape it. So at this point, the Russos have established two things. One, Tony is doing anything he can to deal with his traumatic past except confront it directly. And two, Pepper is no longer in Tony's life, taking away the one thing that gives him the most purpose to be a hero, the one thing he needs to protect the most, and his beacon of comfort when everything goes wrong. Tony is vulnerable, alone, and incapable of dealing with his guilt. Now that Tony is feeling as low as he possibly can, the Russos decide to bring the hammer down.
You want me to put the hammer down?
That was nice what you did for those young people.
This is the approval that would appeal to Tony's facade, but it's meaningless to his true characterization, which is beginning to break through that facade.
They deserve it.
This is Tony's facade speaking. He doesn't really mean this, but it allows him to let his guard down enough to come to terms with the truth of the situation.
Plus, it helps ease my conscience.
They say there's a correlation between generosity and guilt. But if you got the money.
Mrs. Spencer hits the nail right on the head, getting to the core foundation that Tony has built his facade upon. This was too real for Tony. Just take a look at how he reacts in the moment.
Break as many eggs as you like. Right?
He looks to the elevator button. His reaction is flight. Once again, reality is beginning to overcome his facade, and he wants to run from it.
Are you going up?
I'm right where I want to be.
Tony can no longer run from his reality. It's tackling him head on.
Okay, hey. Sorry, it's occupational hazard.
Tony reaches for Mrs. Spencer's purse for two reasons. One, his history of anxiety signals that he thinks it's a gun. And two, because he can't leave the situation, his fight or flight turns to fight.
I work for the State Department. Human resources. I know it's boring, but it enabled me to raise a son. I'm very proud of what he grew up to be. His name was Charlie Spencer. You murdered him in Sokovia. Not that that matters in the least to you. You think you fight for us? You just fight for yourself. Who's going to avenge my son, Stark? He's dead, and I blame you.
Not only does Tony get hit with the strongest dose of reality, but his facade has been completely compromised. He no longer has that crutch to lean on. He has to come to terms with his reality because he has to start making choices under pressure. The Russo brothers have introduced Tony Stark by sending a cannonball into the heart of his facade so he can begin to grow by making strong choices. There's also another reason why this scene is so important. Tony experiences this moment alone, which creates dramatic irony. Dramatic irony is a powerful storytelling technique which is defined as the following. The audience knows something that the other characters don't, creating suspense and tension. Suspense comes from the audience being aware of something that other characters in the scene are not. Tony and the audience are the only ones who experience a mourning mother walk up to Stark and blame him for her son's death. None of the other characters have this experience or know what it's like to be Tony in this moment. That's why this scene cements Tony's motivation to the audience, making him a sympathetic character throughout the duration of the film, even if you disagree with his side of the debate. In fact, there are two moments early in the film where we see one character alone, Tony when the mother confronts him, and Cap while he processes Peggy's death. Both moments are for the audience to see the most defining reasons for each character's motivation, so we understand why they aren't budging on their respective sides of the debate. Marvel consistently knocks film after film right out of the park. Their success can be attributed to the emotionally character-driven arcs that they present so masterfully within the confines of a big-budget action superhero movie. Their use of facade and reality to drive character growth is the reason why the Marvel Cinematic Universe is one marvelous franchise.